Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to why can't prices just stay the same. And I mean, we're in a world now where inflation is just non-stop happening. I mean, it's probably been like this the whole, like for years and years, right? Maybe just recently it's just got a bit more crazy. But I feel like there's always been periods in time where inflation's gone up a lot more compared to how much people earn and all this sort of stuff. And like today, like in the morning, about 2 hours ago, I went to the shop to get some food. I bought some eggs. I saw they've now upped the price again. I think they must have done it in the last few days because it was more expensive than usual, to £2 for 6 big eggs. And I just remember maybe 3-4 years ago, to get like a pack of 12 or 15 eggs, you could get them for like £1.80. Granted, at a different shop, but they're all like similar priced shops. And yeah, I mean, it's just gone a bit mad, to be honest. Maybe not £1.80, maybe like £2 something for 15 eggs. Oh, someone's been a naughty boy. But they get £2 for 6 eggs just seems a bit wild, and obviously that goes into inflation. This is by Vox, and I know people don't really like the channel, or I don't think it's just a channel, just Vox in general. But we're here to see this. Maybe they're going to put in some valid reasons, or maybe they're going to just be defending the corporations. We don't know. But yeah, it's safe to say inflation in general, not just for eggs, is definitely affecting a lot of people right now. And yeah, it's just very obvious. But we're going to check this out and see and learn what the reasoning behind it. Obviously, I guess people will say COVID is a reason behind a lot of it. I feel like that's an excuse now that's just being used to cover up the actual reasons, but or the wars going on. But yeah, there's always going to be reasons and excuses for this stuff. We're going to see. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's check this out. Hopefully you're all doing well, and let's jump into this.
Inflation is causing stress. Bad news about prices in the grocery store.
Historically high inflation.
In 2022, much of the world experienced a period of uncommonly high inflation, with the US, UK, and Eurozone all peaking at around 10%, meaning that prices on average were a full 10% higher than 1 year before. Though that's probably not a surprise to anyone watching this. It's thankfully now closer to the normal range, if still a bit high. But infuriatingly, since this chart just shows a rate of change, that doesn't mean that prices are down, just that they've stopped climbing as fast. And that really sucks. Consumers are stressed, businesses are suffering, and governments are scrambling. But at the same time, if you were to, I don't know, find yourself reading and watching a ton of inflation-related content, you'll also keep hearing this.
A little inflation is a good thing.
A little inflation is a good
A
thing.
little inflation now would be a good thing.
Everybody wants a little inflation.
Why? If rising prices hurt seemingly everyone, why can't they?
We want inflation. No one wants inflation. It's not a good thing. And for the big companies, a little bit of inflation is a good thing. Come on now.
Just stay the same? Why can't inflation be zero?
I mean, I get basic inflation, maybe like 0.5 increase. Maybe that sort of makes sense, right? I mean, I don't know the financials behind it. I feel like maybe there's a sort of a reasoning behind the tiniest bit of inflation, right? Because maybe it means, say that, I mean, I don't know if say people who farm, farmers that make milk and stuff, they're called farmers, right? I mean, they have cows and all that. Yeah, people that have farms that have cows and they make milk, would that little bit of inflation then go towards them? No, it will go towards, I guess, the companies that they sell the milk to. So the inflation doesn't really benefit anyone other than the corporations, to be honest, because you always hear stuff to do with farmers not getting pay rises, and they're just basically earning. They have the hardest job. They don't really earn or see much of the money that the companies really make from their own products. So yeah, I mean, I don't really see how a little bit of inflation could be good other than for the corporations.
The first reason inflation can't stay at zero is because governments and their central banks don't want it to. Lots of countries actively pursue what is called an inflation target.
In the US right now, it's about 2%. In fact, that's the number that's used by most central banks across the world. But the truth of it is, that's a pretty arbitrary number.
The goal is what economists consider a virtuous cycle. Here's what that looks like. In times when prices are generally rising, people tend to expect them to rise further. And that actually encourages people to spend money now on big durable purchases like cars or appliances in order to avoid having to pay more for the same thing later. And the stuff we need to buy no matter what, goods like food or clothing, gets more expensive too, which requires us to spend more. Either way, companies make more money, which means more people have jobs and more of their own money to spend. And that means
Companies make more money so more people have jobs. Do you really think that's what they're doing? Maybe that's what the government want, although I don't know about that, to be honest. So they're saying the more inflation means the more money for the companies, which means more jobs. But I don't really see how that works, because you're still getting the same amount of produce. It's not like you're making more produce or whatever. So I don't really understand that, but you know what? Who knows?
either way, companies make more money, which means more people have jobs and more of their own money to spend. And that means more demand and therefore higher prices. So the cycle continues. But this bit of the cycle is crucial to its virtue. It's okay if prices rise so long as wages rise too. You'll still be able to afford the same goods if your wages keep pace with inflation.
Well, yeah,
Emphasis
but that's not how it really is. To be honest, that's the problem, not part of the problem. That is the problem. Oh, it's a weird world, man.
on the if. In the US, for 2 years, wage growth lagged behind inflation. That trend has reversed, starting in mid-2023.
Wages, especially at the bottom, have kept up with inflation. In fact, in many cases, surpassed inflation. And that is a good thing. That also, we have to remember, wages in this country are rock bottom and have been for way, way too long, right? So wage growth rising, good. Are wages high enough? No.
And a disruption at any point in this loop can lead to the kind of high inflation we've experienced over the past few years, when supply chain interruptions created product shortages, and some companies artificially drove up prices to increase their profits, which, along with some other causes, effectively turned this virtuous cycle into a vicious one.
With Digital Credit Union, you'll get a world of
Vox has got ads. Do Vox need ads? Come on now. You got all the money in the world, haven't you? Anyway, secure that bag, I guess.
The government does have tools to combat rising inflation. They usually shift things here by raising interest rates, which makes all borrowing, including credit cards and bank loans, more expensive.
When the cost of borrowing goes up, it becomes more expensive to make investments, to hire people, and that eventually slows the economy down.
That's what the US Federal Reserve did in 2022, which did help bring inflation closer to that 2% target, while placing an even higher financial strain on families who may need to borrow just to make ends meet.
When the Fed uses interest rates to bring down inflation, what they're doing is tamping down that demand, right? They're telling people, you can't have a job. Like, let's put you out of work so that demand slows, that, price growth slows.
The Fed raises interest rates to slow down spending across the economy, partly by signaling to markets that they're taking the problem seriously, which creates an expectation that inflation will fall. But we also have to talk about what happens when prices fall instead of rise. That's called deflation. And falling prices honestly sounds pretty good, but they can also introduce another kind of cycle, a deflationary spiral. When prices fall, consumers may hold off on making big purchases, hoping for even lower prices in the future, and the stuff we need costs less, so we just spend less in general. If people are spending less, companies make less. They start to cut costs.
Do they really
ultimately
think that?
they
So, for example, with housing, say house prices drop. Not like loads, but just a decent amount where you're like, okay, now that's a decent investment. Is this basically saying that people will wait for it to drop more? I can sort of see that with houses, but then when it comes to foods and produce, like this, I don't know how this would even be the case. People are always going to buy this stuff, unless it just isn't focusing on that at all. But this is basically just focusing on like investments and stuff, really, because when it comes to foods or products like electronics and stuff, people aren't going to wait to buy those things. They're just going to be happy that they're cheaper. But yeah,
just spend less in general. If people are spending less, companies make less. They start to cut costs. And ultimately, they lay off employees. Unemployed people spend less, and even the people who are employed might choose to save more to stave off financial loss. So prices go down even further as demand goes down.
So ultimately, all of that adds up to slower economic growth as a whole.
Which is really hard to fix because governments don't have the same ability to respond to deflation as they do to inflation. Look at this chart again. The last time inflation dipped below 2% in spring of 2020, the US brought interest rates all the way down to 0.05%. And after bottoming out for a bit, that seemed to work. Inflation inched back up. But if inflation hadn't come back up, the government would have had limited options. Their rates were already getting almost out zero. And then things could get dicey. Historically, periods of true deflation are pretty rare, but when they do happen, it seems that fixing them requires a pretty serious shock to the economy. The Great Depression was in part a deflationary spiral, solved only by the...
Seeing this little thing here, this little graph. So this is current day, right? I mean, this is 2020. I guess it's not really showing the last few years, but this really shows how hard people had it. Let's just say, I mean, even 40 years ago? But then going back 50, 60, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, yeah. 100 years ago, even more so, yeah. It was a tough time. I mean, people know that, but it does make you realise, man, like, this stuff always happens. And I guess it's now at a point where the extremes aren't as extreme, but it still affects many people to the point of, I mean, I guess maybe not to the point of this, because a lot of people here were probably not eating and stuff, but to be fair, I don't know how, like, to the extreme cases now, how people are really dealing with this, but looking at this graph, it does show how bad it really was at certain points. Obviously, this is the Great Depression sort of period at certain points here, or the financial crash here is probably around this little area, and doesn't really compare, but I don't know.
The Great Depression was...
This is just inflation, to be fair as well. This isn't just focusing on the whole economy. This is just purely inflation.
Part a deflationary spiral, solved only by the outbreak of World War II, when the government supercharged spending and employment. And Japan is finally emerging from decades of chronic deflation, but that's thanks in no small part to the high inflation that most of the world battled over the last few years. You don't want to rely on those kinds of things. If inflation goes below zero, it is hard to fix.
The cost of deflation is really high, and that's something that we want to avoid.
This is where inflation targets come in. Let's look at this chart again. These lines are pretty shaky because there are a lot of really complicated factors that affect inflation.
The macroeconomy is made up of the decisions of millions of people, of millions of businesses, the way those decisions interact. I mean, try thinking about how to map everything out, and it's mind-blowing, right?
Inflation will always fluctuate, even if it's just a little. And this is the last big reason why they don't want inflation to be 0%. If inflation sits here, that basic shakiness is constantly at risk of dropping down into the deflation zone, triggering the bad cycle. And the way to prevent that is to have it sit just a little bit higher. So...
A little inflation is usually a good thing.
yeah, that's annoying.
I mean, I get the idea of not wanting to have deflation, right? That is something that I think does make sense, but is that better? Is that worse than having 10% inflation? I don't know about that. Inflation allows companies to cut your wages without cutting your wages. You completely forgot about the parachute pricing. This is where prices go up. The companies like the additional revenue and purposely slow the decline back to an acceptable amount. Companies cut labour no matter what because they are only concerned with increasing shareholder profit. Exactly, like they're not going to add more jobs because they're making more money. That's not how it's going to be. Unless I guess maybe they're opening new branches. But again, I'm thinking more in terms of like the food product industry. I don't really think, like, when it comes to food produce, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, the amount of people wanting to buy that stuff, it over time slowly goes up because there's slowly more and more people in countries and on the planet. But I mean, it's just one of those things. Like, I don't really see how inflation or how deflation would stop people buying food produce. I mean, that's obviously just not the case. Food produce, I can only understand it being more expensive if it's the inflation going up. If it's, like, I guess, sold by, let's just say a farmer has their own shop and they sell it there. I can sort of understand, or I can understand that because they're trying to keep up. They're the ones really working for the stuff they're making. not these big corporations that are already making profits no matter what anyway. That just annoys me to a point where it's just like, yeah, just get stuffed, honestly. But I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the tax on people who stuff their money in their mattress. But there we go. This is, I guess, a little video, probably just to defend the big corporations. But honestly, I don't know. I mean, I find it interesting, right? You can see how it compares to previous years and a long time ago, and it just puts it into perspective. But I guess let me know your thoughts on this, how you're dealing, or how you were dealing with this for the last few years, because I know a lot of people feel the effects of this a lot more than other people, right? But yeah, that's pretty much it. Until next time, peace.